The stranger. The town was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone. I grew up here, and I thought I knew everything about it. But one summer, everything changed. It started on a Friday evening. I was working the late shift at the diner. The usual customers were there: Mr. Hayes, who sat in the corner with his newspaper, and Mary and Tom, the couple who shared a slice of pie every night. The bell on the door rang, and in walked someone I didn't recognize. He was tall, with dark hair that looked like he hadn't brushed it. His clothes were wrinkled, and his shoes were covered in dirt, like he had walked a long way. "Table for one?" I asked, grabbing a menu. He nodded, his eyes scanning the room quickly. There was something about him. He wasn't nervous, exactly, but he seemed sharp, like he noticed every little thing. He sat in the back corner, away from everyone else. When I brought him a coffee, he didn't thank me, just stared into the cup like it held some big secret. "What brings you to town?" I asked, trying to be polite. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Just passing through," he said. His voice was quiet, but there was something heavy in it. I nodded and left him alone. But as the night went on, I couldn't stop watching him. He didn't eat much, just a small plate of eggs and toast. And he didn't talk to anyone. When he finally paid his bill, he left a big tip, too big. Then he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Be careful tonight," he said. "Things aren't always what they seem." Before I could ask him what he meant, he walked out the door. I stood there, holding the money he left, my stomach twisting. Something about him didn't feel right. The rest of the night passed slowly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, even though he was gone. When I finally closed the diner and walked home, the streets were quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavy, and every shadow seemed to move. As I reached my house, I noticed something strange. The front door was open, just a crack. I always locked my door. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. The lights were off, and the house was silent. But I felt it, someone had been there. And on the kitchen table, there was a note. It said, "You've seen him. Be careful." The note shook in my hands. My heart pounded as I read the words again. "You've seen him. Be careful." Who left it? And why? I locked the door behind me and checked the house, room by room. Everything seemed normal, no broken windows, no missing things. But the note on the kitchen table made it clear, someone had been inside. I barely slept that night. Every little sound made me sit up, my pulse racing. Was it the stranger from the diner? His words kept echoing in my mind. Things aren't always what they seem. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I didn't believe that. At work, I tried to focus, but I couldn't stop looking at the door. Every time it opened, my heart jumped, expecting to see him again. But he didn't come back. By the time my shift ended, I felt uneasy. The sun was setting, and the streets were growing darker. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. I turned around several times, but the sidewalks were empty. When I got home, I checked the door carefully. Locked. Everything seemed fine. But when I stepped inside, I froze. Another note was on the table. This one said, "Don't trust him." My chest tightened. Was it the same person? Who were they warning me about? The stranger. I picked up the note, my hands trembling. As I stared at it, my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. It was a text from an unknown number. "Do you know what he's done?" I typed back, my fingers shaking. "Who is this?" The reply came quickly, "Stay away from him. He's dangerous." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Dangerous? What had he done? I tried to call the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I looked around the room, feeling like someone was watching me. I needed answers. The next day, I went to the library. The stranger wasn't from town, but maybe someone else had seen him. I asked the librarian if anyone new had been around lately. She nodded. "There's been a man staying at the old motel on the edge of town. Quiet guy, doesn't talk much." My stomach dropped. It had to be him. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for another note or text. I needed to know the truth. I grabbed my coat and headed for the motel. The motel was on the edge of town, just like the librarian said. It wasn't the kind of place people usually stayed. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a dim light on the empty parking lot. A few cars were parked near the rooms, but there was no movement. I felt a knot in my stomach as I walked toward the office. The night air was cold, and the silence was almost too much. The sound of my footsteps felt too loud in the empty space. The office door opened with a squeak, and I stepped inside. The man behind the counter looked up, his face blank. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "A man, tall, dark hair, hasn't been here long." He didn't blink. "We get all kinds here." His voice was flat, like he'd said the same thing 100 times before. "Does he go by a name?" I pushed. The man shrugged, not giving much away. "Room 3, but I wouldn't bother him. He's not the talking type." I nodded quickly and turned to leave. Room 3. That was where he was staying. I walked across the parking lot to the small row of rooms. The windows of most of them were dark, but room 3 had a faint light shining through the curtains. I stood there for a moment, unsure. Was I doing the right thing? Should I just walk away? No. I had to know. I knocked softly at first, then louder. I waited. Nothing. I was about to turn away when the door suddenly creaked open, and there he was. The stranger from the diner. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. Just stared at me with those dark, intense eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice cold. I swallowed hard. "I need to know what's going on. Who are you? And why are you following me?" His eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I hesitated for a second, but then stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, with just a bed, a small desk, and a chair. There was a suitcase on the floor, but it didn't look like it had been unpacked. He was living out of it. I took a deep breath. "Why are you in town?" He didn't speak right away. Instead, he walked to the window and pulled the curtain back, looking out into the night. "I didn't choose to be here," he said quietly. "But it's better if you don't know why." My heart raced. "No. I need to know. Who are you?" He turned to face me, his eyes now cold and hard. "You've seen too much already." I stepped back, suddenly feeling trapped. What does that mean? Why are you watching me? The stranger was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke again, his voice low. Because you were never supposed to see me. And now that you have, you're in danger. I froze. Danger? From what? He stepped toward me, his face close now. From me. His words hung in the air, heavy with something I couldn't understand. From me. I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I took a step back, my eyes searching his face, trying to read him, trying to find some hint of a lie. He didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on me, dark and unreadable. Yes, he said simply. You should have left me alone. But now. I didn't know whether to run or stay. Part of me wanted to bolt out of the room and never look back, but another part, something deep inside, kept me rooted to the spot. Who are you? I asked again, my voice shaking now. His lips curled into a tight smile, but it wasn't a smile. It was a warning. I told you. I'm not who you think I am. He walked over to the desk and opened the drawer. I watched him closely, afraid of what he might pull out. But he didn't take anything. Instead, he grabbed a small notebook. He turned to face me again, holding it out. I don't expect you to understand. I never wanted you involved, but now. He paused. It's too late. I didn't take the notebook. I didn't even move. What is this? I asked, my voice firming up. Proof, he said softly. Of everything. The real reason I'm here. The reason you're in danger. I finally reached out and grabbed it from him. The pages were filled with notes, names, and dates, strange, disconnected sentences, scribbled hastily. Some of it didn't make any sense, but some of it felt real. You're not just passing through, are you? I asked, looking up at him. He shook his head, eyes dark. No. And neither are you. Suddenly, the weight of everything hit me. The notes, the warnings, the strange feeling that something had been off ever since I met him. I thought I was just dealing with some strange guy in a small town, but now, I wasn't so sure. What do you mean, I'm not just passing through? He sighed, his face falling. Because this place, this town, it's all connected. Connected to something ancient. I blinked. What are you talking about? You'll see soon enough, he said, his voice low and heavy. The thing that brought me here, the reason I've been watching you, it's tied to this town. It's been watching you, too. I felt my blood run cold. What thing? He stepped closer, his eyes now filled with something I couldn't place. Fear? Guilt? I didn't want to hurt you, but I have no choice. Now that you've seen me, you're part of this. And if you don't listen, if you don't help me, we're both going to die. The room seemed to close in around me. His words made no sense, but the way he said them, the way he looked at me, told me he was serious. What do you want from me? I whispered, feeling trapped. He placed his hands on his hips and looked at me, his face pale. The key. You have to find the key. The key. I repeated, confused. He nodded, his voice urgent. It's the only way to stop it. The only way to stop what's coming. I didn't understand, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't walk away from this. Whatever this was, it had already pulled me in. The stranger's eyes met mine again, the urgency in them growing. You have to find the key before it finds you.